President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to announce his cabinet tomorrow with a number of significant changes. Many are expecting him to use cabinet announcements to change how his executive and ministers are structured and to reduce it quite significantly. Well, joining me now to look at some of the drivers behind this much anticipated announcement is a political analyst, Ebrahim Fakir, author and political commentator Eusebius Mckaiser, and then also the Wits Vice-Chancellor, Professor Habib. And from our Cape Town studios, we have a political analyst, Asanda Ngoasheng. Asanda, I'm going to start with you in Cape Town. If one looks at the way in which the economy is managed, we've got several ministers that are dealing with the economy. We've got economic planning, we've got the treasury, we've got trade and industry, we've got a whole range of them. Do you expect a trimming down of those positions and consolidate it into almost a super economics minister under Cyril Ramaphosa?
Yes, I think that we're very likely to see a much more trimmed down finance department, where everything that is presently put in different units is going to be in one unit. I think that Cyril Ramaphosa has already said that he wants to, for instance, reintroduce entrepreneurship into the curriculum. So he may keep the Department of Small Business, but I suspect that the economic development department is going to go back into finance, and we're going to see a much more tighter, much more streamlined finance department, because it becomes easier to implement financial policy if you have one person who reports to the president and is able to look and be able to tell what policies have been implemented and how they've been implemented.
Asanda, thanks so much. Let me pick up from that with you, Eusebius. I saw you shaking your head several times when Asanda was speaking. Do you agree with her? But more importantly, do you think that is actually what Cyril Ramaphosa is going to do?
Yes, on both counts, and not just because I like Asanda and I've known her for a long time, but because I think, Karima, even though there are some ministers that we like in the economics cluster, I think time is ripe to ask, what did they do, and would we have missed them if they were not around for the last 5-10 years? Let's take an excellent thinker in Ebrahim Patel. Can the average viewer of ENCA's The Fix right now tell us what was the most important nexus contribution to economic thought, policy and implementation of economic development? I think the answer is no.
Well, I can tell you the Competitions Commission is largely his creation, and he's been able to exercise quite a bit of influence on the way in which monopolies work.
But the question is, you need an entire ministry in order to be anti-competitive in terms of getting the regulatory framework respected and implemented in the state.
Yes, but we were talking about whether he made a contribution, and I'm saying he did. Professor Habib, do you think that the economics cluster is going to get smaller or bigger?
So firstly, I think that there's two things. One is I think it's going to get smaller. The second, I think, is you need to de-party politicize it. And I think that Cyril Ramaphosa knows that. He doesn't want the treasury the focus of political attention by all the parties. And so what he's going to try and do is get somebody in that is going to de-party politicize it. Now, one idea is perhaps keep Tito Mboweni in there for now, bring in and couple it with somebody like Barbara Creasy, who's a technocrat, who gets her head down and does the work. It gets the attention of the treasury and gets the markets focusing on the real issues that it needs to be focused on. So that's what I think is the first part. The second, I think the most controversial part is the Pravin Gordhan decision, because that's as much a part of the economy. And here I think that there's a real debate to be had. And I think on that issue, most people are saying, well, ignore the public protector. I'm worried about that. So I don't think, let me say, I think he's the best person for the job. I think he's the best person to clean out the looters. I also don't like the way the EFF is approaching it. I think that they've targeted him for racist reasons, and they want to settle political scores when he correctly intervened in Limpopo. But whether you like it or not, this is no longer simply an allegation, because you've got one additional thing. A Chapter 9 institution has pronounced on it. And most people are saying ignore it because we find the public protector problematic. She's lost cases before. My view is, whether you like it or not, that's not consistency. What you're going to have to do is, if I was Cyril Ramaphosa, I'd say, ask him to stand out even temporarily. Clean his name, go to court, clear it up. And after that, what I would do is act against the public protector. Because then what you do is you say, not only are you meddling in party politics, but you're bloody incompetent, and deal with it. But I think keeping him here under these conditions is a very, very dangerous constitutional precedent.
Do you agree with Professor Habib's pronouncements on Pravin Gordhan and the way in which he needs to deal with the issue of consistency?
I'm afraid I don't. And I don't because I think we must find or think about what the public protector's found on. She hasn't found on a matter of ethics or a matter of law. She's found a question of administrative procedure. So this is a question of someone who irregularly authorized something they ought not to have. So that the substance does matter in this case, Professor Habib. And it matters for two reasons. A, that it's an administrative act, and B, the sanction certainly should not be a preclusion from holding political office. There must be some other remedy that could be applied in this instance. Now, because he's had two bites of the cherry, Karima, I should have two. On the question of the ministry, you know, we're talking about this ministry, but the small business department, so to speak, is the one which was obviously must go.
Yeah.
My concern is not so much about whether the economics ministry is big or small.
Yeah.
It is what is going to be the posture.
Yeah.
And if the posture is simply going to be about austerity, then we've got problems coming. Ramaphosa would be well advised not to go just for austerity. The austerity must be with regard to trimming government fat, not with regard to what our public policy programs and welfare benefits must be.
Okay, Asanda, let me bring you in here. There's this idea that we have a bloated cabinet, we have a bloated civil service, and we don't need people to do. But the reality is that the police, for example, need 64,000 people. That's the amount of vacancies. Now, that's public servants. So how do you couple that with the rationality of trimming down government when we know, for example, that crime is an equal opportunity basket? It goes for everyone, rich or poor. And so how does the president walk this tightrope of both being effective in lessening our reliance on big government, but also making sure that there is government when it is required, particularly at the level of crime?
Well, I think that just to throw back a little bit into the discussion about economics, I think that although the Department of Small Business hasn't done what it was supposed to do, I think it's a very important department and has a lot of potential because job creation comes from SMMEs. And if you don't have a very specific focus on SMMEs and you are not looking at what policies you're putting in place, you are not going to have any job creation. And I think, you know, the SMME has to be separated from big enterprise because it requires quite particular and quite specific policies in order to make sure that SMMEs work in this country. And in terms of the question that you asked about police, I think that it's very important for the government to be able to separate between austerity in terms of how public servants use the money and what is actually required. So one of the problems we have is that when we talk austerity, we just simply cut things without thinking about what is the effect of cutting. For example, if we decide we're no longer going to fill those posts, what is the effect going to be on South Africa and on our ability to actually actively fight crime? And I think that also, although I don't necessarily agree with the DA that there should be a provincial police system, but I think that there has to be a little bit more control at provincial level of police and the way that police are able to work, because different provinces face different problems and different provinces, you know, need and should be able to recruit specialists. For example, in the Western Cape has a gangsterism problem that doesn't exist as much in other provinces. And therefore, the Western Cape should be in a position to hire and should be in a position to actually be able to implement policies that are going to deal with gangsterism. And that should be the same for all the other provinces which deal with different and specific crimes. And I think for as long as the government, you know, sticks to this idea that national should have everything and national should be doing everything, we're really going to see an inability to deliver services because there aren't people at the level of provincial who are able to implement.
All right, let's use this opportunity that Asanda used about the Western Cape, which is the one province that the African National Congress doesn't rule, to take a listen to what Mmusi Maimane, who also attended the inauguration, had to say about the priorities of Cyril Ramaphosa's cabinet.
I have proposed over periods and years that we can run a government of between 15 to 20 ministers. We must get rid of deputy ministers. I don't see the point. We've got to streamline the state. But furthermore, we need some key appointments. And we need a health minister who's not going to be just in the doctrine of NHI, but rather to look at how we can work with the private sector to help in ensuring that we have a healthcare that provides for everybody. Let's look to make the economic cluster much smaller and appoint a Minister of Finance who's competent. I would urge that Tito Mboweni must remain in the post so that he can continue the work of reform that we're talking about. I think that we need a strong Minister of Education who will not listen to unions, because the unions are holding education back in certain instances where they're overly protecting teachers at the expense of students. And then we need to ultimately ensure that we set up a ministry for jobs. I think in collaboration with cities, I would urge that must be a crucial ministry so that we can create work. That's certainly what I would do, and I would urge President Ramaphosa to do likewise.
Well, that is, of course, the leader of the opposition, Mmusi Maimane. You were shaking your head a lot, Eusebius. First of all, should there be different types of government at provincial level? Should the same departments be replicated all over the show, given that departments are, provinces are different? Gauteng, for example, is a city region. It's not so much a province. Your views on that?
I think there's complexity here, Karima, that we can't avoid, and as we are waiting for the announcement of both the shape and the size of cabinet, as South Africans, we need to be cognizant that the president is caught between a rock and a hard place. In the short term, and I agree with Ebrahim, but notwithstanding the agreement that leaner doesn't mean more effective, that nevertheless we want to see the president indicating an ability to keep spending as low as possible, including a public wage bill that is way out of control. So we need some sort of signaling that is capable of paring down cabinet, even if it means that the largesse that he will have to dispense for internal factional battles will be reduced. But I think we need a longer conversation, and that's one that will take us into the next 6 months, 12 months, where we need to ask tough questions about the state overall, the concurrence relationship between different spheres of government is something that hasn't worked for us. You have a Minister of Health, Mmusi is talking there about the Ministry of Health, that often will say to you, I wish I could do more for a hospital in PE or in East London, but my hands are tied by the constitutional arrangement that we have. And so in a sense, what we need to do is to have a longer, quieter conversation about the entire edifice that we created in the 1990s.
In fact, the edifice about this kind of government that we had was driven by two principles. The one was the African National Congress that insisted that South Africa be a united, unitary state, and that we don't have group rights over individual rights. And then, of course, you had the old liberals, I don't know what their name was at that time, my memory fails me now, but argued for, enclaves, if you like, for a more federal kind of system. But we've also seen patronage spawn at provincial level. Do we need provincial government, Professor Habib?
So I would say two things. The first question about, when you asked the question about 64,000 policemen, I do think that the first place we need to cut the state is the management hierarchy. We've got too many managers, too few on the beat cops. And so I think we have some ability to cut back on the state, but at the managerial layers. Everybody's got a press officer, everybody's got a director and a deputy director. And I wonder, those are across departments, and there's no thinking through what the disciplines are and why you need those things. So I think there's a lot of fat on the top. The second is, I do think we need a very considered conversation on the relationship between the three tiers. The biggest defenders of provincial government now are the ANC, precisely because of the politics of patronage. And I do think that if we have a provincial government, it needs to be pared down more. I think your ability of growing cities are much more greater. And so what I would love to do is have a serious rethink of the entire public structure and say, what do we need at national? What do we need in the cities? And then what is the role of the province, if any, in that? And I do think that that's a much more considered concept.
Now, of course, Ebrahim, the idea that provinces must be scrapped is not an old one. The South African Communist Party has asked for it. The Congress of South African Trade Unions have asked for it. But as Professor Habib said, the ANC is the loudest in opposition, because they know for a fact that that is where many people can use the state as a piggy bank. Should we skip provincial government and empower municipal government, where the tar, where the tire hits the tar, where people actually experience the cold face of government?
You could, but it means that you would need, because here's the question. I think we're tackling it the wrong way. We need to ask, what's the problem with the provinces? Is it the structure or is it the functioning? And in my view, it's not necessarily the structure, it's actually the functioning. Because the provinces have extraordinary powers to do good, especially when it comes to transformative aspects of life. Section 76 of the Constitution. So the concurrent powers are in health, in education, in welfare. In security, what Asanda is talking about, there are significant powers for MECs. But if you had a former MEC, if you remember the Limpopo textbook scandal, where a national minister suddenly says, I wash my hands because my role is simply policy. Well, where's the oversight? And it's when you start exercising oversight, you can direct provincial ministers to start doing certain things. So it's not so much for me the problem of structure, it's actually the problem of function. Now, if you get the provinces, because they're an intermediary layer of oversight and accountability, if you can get them to work, you could actually see a different South Africa.
There is a design problem, though, that doesn't help us, which is to say, for example, Karim, we don't know where the buck stops. When you have a textbook scandal in Limpopo, you've got a national minister that says, I really wish I could interfere, but it takes extraordinary use of the Constitution for me to be able to do that. And you've got an MEC that says, I really wish I could deliver on this thing, but when it comes to for example, the plan for getting the textbooks from the depot to the schools, my hands are tied and I'm at the mercy of what some official in Pretoria decides.
But actually, they're not. I think they use this as an excuse.
Let me stop you men from dominating the conversation. Asanda, let me bring you in again. Are you of the view that municipal government should be considerably strengthened, given more powers, and that the powers of provinces be seriously trimmed?
No, I think that what we really need to look at is cooperative governance and how cooperative governance currently works. I think that the fact that we have a department hasn't worked, and I think that the presidency should take cooperative governance and put it within the planning unit, which already sits with the presidency, so that you have somebody who is then responsible for making sure that for every single policy and for every single thing that you want to implement, there's a plan that says at national level what's going to happen, at provincial level what's going to happen, and at local level what's going to happen. Because essentially what we have now is that a lot of the important people within political parties end up at national level and they end up at provincial level, which then leaves a local government that doesn't have enough people who are capable and actually able to do the job of delivering services. And then when they fail to deliver services, it then has a ripple effect on the province and the way in which people vote for the province, and it has a ripple effect at national level and the way in which people experience being in South Africa. Because you must remember that if I'm in Cape Town and my experience of being South African in Cape Town is different to somebody's experience of being, you know, a South African living in the Eastern Cape or living somewhere, let's say in East London, then there's a problem there. You need to get to a situation where the person in Cape Town and the person in East London is able to experience government almost in the same way. So you almost think about it as a sort of franchise model where you know that if you interact with government in any different province, the quality of service you're going to get, the ability for you to get the things that you need to get done is going to be the same, which is something that we're not seeing at the moment. We're seeing that, you know, the Western Cape, for example, will have a much more effective sort of administrative arm. The Eastern Cape will struggle with certain things and be good at certain things. You've got, you know, Mpumalanga struggling struggling with certain things and being good at certain things. And we need to think about where do the people who have the skills to do the job sit? And how do we make sure that the strongest people actually sit both at provincial and at local government, instead of everybody running and trying to make sure that they get on the national list? Because that's the problem that we have at the moment, where local government, which is responsible for service delivery, has the weakest people.
Absolutely. I mean, it is President Thabo Mbeki who said that people have this idea that municipal government is kind of, you know, the third class of the train system. You put your worst people there, and yet that is the first place at which people must interact. Now, we've got less than 5 minutes to get through this program. Eusebius, let's get away from the structure to the names, okay? Who must go immediately?
Well, I mean, there's certain people who obviously can't be in cabinet again, ever again. People like Batabile Dlamini shouldn't be there. Nomvula Mokonyane obviously is not eligible, but even if she was to be one of the 1 or 2 people who could be brought in, even though she's not an MP, that's a prerogative the president has. He shouldn't use it. And then someone like, notwithstanding my disagreement with your body's ministry, someone like Ibrahim Patel, for example, could be brought in as well, even if that person is not in the National Assembly. Those are some of the names. As for Deputy President, I think we'd need 20 minutes around that one. It shouldn't be Didi Mabuza, and I think any of the 3 obvious brilliant women that have been bandied about would be excellent choices. Okay,
the city press says Didi is back, that he's never really been out of the process. Should he be back?
I suspect they're right. If I had my own way and there wasn't political factions to manage, I think that the best choice would be Nkosazana. I think Naneli Pandu would be great, but I would really want to retain her at higher education, because she's the one minister who understands it, and I'm really scared that you're not going to be able to address inequality in this country without getting post-secondary education system working.
Ibrahim?
What? Who should stay?
Who should stay? Who should go?
Well, I mean,
we've got Faith Mutambo as a sworn-in MP.
That's the thing. You know, I think the president's hamstrung by the fact that he's only got 2 people he can appoint from outside elected members of the National Assembly. And if you look across the National Assembly, there aren't terribly rich pickings, I'm afraid to say.
Yes.
One would wish he had more space to appoint from outside the National Assembly.
Okay. Asanda, I'm going to give you the last word. Should Didi come back or not?
It's quite a difficult one, because, you know, it depends on what Cyril Ramaphosa decides to do. He can either have a strategy that says have your worst enemy closest to you, in which case he should be deputy president, or have him as far away as possible, in which case then he shouldn't be. But then if he leaves him out and doesn't put him into government, that means that he's going to go to Lutuli House, which then has the potential to create 2 centers of power, which is a problem that we've seen in the past doesn't work for the ANC. And so it really just depends on what strategy or what prisoner's dilemma or game theory Cyril Ramaphosa decides he's going to choose in the end. Because Didi is dangerous, whether within government or outside of government, because we know how manipulative he is, we know how influential he is, and you know how he has the power to surprise all of us, including some of the people who think are closest to him.
The cat with 9 lives, that is where we leave it. Thank you very much, Asanda, in Cape Town, and my esteemed panel, the Vice-Chancellor of the University of the Witwatersrand, Professor Habib, author and broadcaster, and also public intellectual Eusebius Mckaiser, and then, of course, political analyst, government specialist Ebrahim Fakir. Thank you so very much. Still ahead on The Fix, we find out about the stories that made it to the front pages of South Africa's Sunday newspapers.